are only two countries on Earth that are double-landlocked. A country that is landlocked is surrounded by land. A country that is double-landlocked is surrounded by other countries that are themselves surrounded by land. To reach the sea, you must cross at least two borders. There are nearly 200 sovereign states in the world. Only two of them belong to this category. One is Liechtenstein, a principality the size of a large town tucked between Switzerland and Austria in the Alps. The other is a nation 30,000 times its size, a country surrounded by 5 other landlocked nations, a country whose nearest coastline is more than 1,000 kilometers away, on a sea that has no outlet. And yet, for nearly 1,500 years, this same country sat at the absolute center of the largest trade network humanity had ever built. Camels from China stopped here to rest. Silk from Hangzhou changed hands here for gold from Africa. The wealth of the medieval world passed through 3 of its cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva, at a scale that funded armies, built libraries, and produced one of the greatest flowerings of science and art in human history. How does the geographic center of the world become a country most travelers can't find on a map? The answer involves a fortress, an empire, an inland sea that no longer exists, and a wall made not of stone, but of silence, built sometime in the last 100 years. This is Uzbekistan. To understand where you are when you stand in Uzbekistan, you have to start with the land itself. The country occupies the heart of Central Asia, an area slightly larger than Sweden, wedged between Kazakhstan to the north, Turkmenistan to the southwest, Afghanistan along a short southern border, and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan to the east. Every one of those neighbors is also landlocked. There is no port to reach. There is no river that flows to the ocean. The 2 great rivers of the country, the Amu Darya and the Sia Darya, flow north and west into a lake that until recently was the 4th largest in the world. Roughly 4/5 of Uzbekistan is desert or semi-desert. The Kizilkum, which means red sand, stretches across the center of the country, a sea of dunes and gravel plateaus the size of Japan. Summers reach 45 degrees Celsius, winters drop below freezing. Between the desert and the eastern mountains lies a different country entirely, the Fergana Valley, an oasis fed by glacial meltwater where peaches, melons, cotton, and silkworms have been grown for 2,000 years. To stand in the valley in spring is to forget that the desert begins again 60 kilometers to the west. This is the geography that made everything possible. The deserts were impassable except by camel caravan. The oases, Tashkent, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, became the only places where merchants could rest, trade, drink, and resupply. They became the pearls strung along the Silk Road. And because nothing could pass through Central Asia except by stopping at them, they became for a time the richest cities in the known world. The Silk Road, as a phrase, was invented in the 19th century by a German geographer. The thing itself is far older. It began around the 2nd century before the Common Era, when a Chinese diplomat named Zhang Qian was sent west to look for allies against the nomads of the Mongolian steppe. He returned with stories of prosperous kingdoms his court had never heard of. Kingdoms in Sogdia, in Bactria, in Fergana. Within a generation, caravans were moving silk, paper, jade, and lacquerware west from China, and bringing back gold, glass, horses, and grapes from Persia and the Mediterranean. For the next 1500 years, this corridor was the most important trade route in the world. Not just silk moved along it, mathematics moved along it, chess moved along it. Paper, gunpowder, the compass, vaccination, the concept of zero, all carried by merchants who passed through these oasis towns. Religions moved along it too. Buddhism reached China this way. Manichaeism, Nestorian Christianity, and eventually Islam all spread along the same dusty roads. And at the center of it all, between the two rivers, on a plateau where the desert paused long enough to permit cities, stood Samarkand. Samarkand is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. Founded in the 7th century before the Common Era, captured by Alexander the Great in 329 BCE, who reportedly said upon seeing it, "Everything I have heard about Maracanda is true, except that it is more beautiful than I ever imagined." Conquered later by Arabs, who brought Islam, sacked in 1220 by Genghis Khan, who killed most of its inhabitants and burned what remained. And then, 150 years after Genghis Khan reduced it to ash, something extraordinary happened. A young warlord, born in a village 70 kilometers south of Samarkand, decided to make it his capital. His name was Timur. The Europeans, who feared him without ever quite understanding him, called him Tamerlane, a corruption of Timur the Lame, after a hip injury that left him with a limp. Timur is one of the most consequential and one of the most destructive figures in human history. His conquests between 1370 and 1405 killed an estimated 17 million people, roughly 5% of the world's population at that time. He built towers from the skulls of those he defeated. He destroyed Delhi, Damascus, and Baghdad. He fought the Ottoman Sultan and won. By the time he died, his empire stretched from the Tigris to the borders of China. And all of this wealth, all of this conquest, was funneled back into one city, Samarkand. Timur brought to Samarkand the finest craftsmen of every land he conquered: architects from Persia, tile makers from Damascus, scholars from Baghdad, calligraphers from India. He built mosques and madrasas. He built tombs and palaces. He built a city designed to be more magnificent than anywhere else on Earth. 600 years later, much of what he built still stands. At the center of the old city is Registan Square. The name means sandy place in Persian. 3 enormous madrasas frame the square, their facades clad in turquoise, lapis, and cobalt tile in geometric patterns so intricate that mathematicians still publish papers analyzing them. The oldest, the Ulugh Beg Madrasa, was built between 1417 and 1420 by Timur's grandson, and it became, in its time, the most prestigious center of Islamic learning in Central Asia. "500 meters away stands the Gur Emir, Timur's own mausoleum. A turquoise dome on an octagonal drum, the interior gilded with so much gold leaf that the chamber seems to glow even at midday. Inside the crypt, beneath a slab of dark jade, lie the bones of one of history's most successful conquerors. 2 centuries after his death, when Mughal princes in India built the Taj Mahal, their architects looked back to the Gur Emir for the original idea of the bulbous dome on a square base. The Taj is a granddaughter of Samarkand. But the most remarkable thing Timur's family built was not a tomb or a mosque. It was an instrument. In 1428, Timur's grandson Ulugh Beg, astronomer, mathematician, and short-lived ruler, constructed an observatory on a hill at the edge of Samarkand. It was, at the time, the largest astronomical instrument ever built. A meridian arc 40 meters long, sunk partway into the bedrock, calibrated so finely that Ulugh Beg's catalogue of 1,018 stars, completed without telescopes, remained the most accurate in the world for the next 200 years. He calculated the length of the solar year to within 25 seconds of the modern value. 25 seconds. With a stone arc in 1437 in the middle of Central Asia. And then, in 1449, his own son had him assassinated. The observatory was abandoned. The records were scattered. The instrument was buried under earth and time and was not rediscovered until 1908. An entire civilization of measurement forgotten in the sand for 4.5 centuries. To walk through Samarkand today is to walk through the bones of an empire that was, for a brief and brilliant moment, the center of human civilization. The Bibi Kanim Mosque, on the eastern edge of the old city, was Timur's final great project. He commissioned it in 1399 after a campaign in India and reportedly ordered 95 elephants to haul building materials from the quarries. The central dome rises 45 meters above the courtyard. When it was completed, it was the largest mosque in the Islamic world. The legend, recorded in local chronicles, holds that the architect fell in love with Timur's favorite wife while the conqueror was away at war. She refused him. He kissed her on the cheek anyway. The kiss left a mark. When Timur returned, he had the architect executed and ordered every woman in Samarkand to wear a veil from that day forward. The legend is almost certainly apocryphal. The mosque is not. North of the Bibi Kanim lies a narrow street that climbs a gentle hill. On either side, mausoleum after mausoleum, the Shah-e-Zinda, which translates as the living king. 40 tombs along a single avenue, each one tiled in a different shade of blue. Turquoise from Persia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cobalt from beyond the Caspian. The tombs hold Timur's wives, sisters, generals, nieces. The colors are so saturated, so layered, that photographs cannot reproduce them. You have to stand inside the corridor in the late afternoon, when the sun catches the tile at a low angle, and watch the blues seem to shift in the air. This was Samarkand at its peak, a city of perhaps 150,000 people, with libraries that held works no longer available in Europe, observatories more advanced than anything in Christendom, gardens irrigated by underground channels, and bazaars where you could buy goods that had traveled 5,000 kilometers to reach you. 200 kilometers to the west, on the edge of the desert, stood Samarkand's older sister. Bukhara is older than Samarkand. The site has been inhabited for at least 2,500 years. If Samarkand was the city of conquerors and palaces, Bukhara was something different. It was the city of merchants and scholars, of theologians and mathematicians, of the kind of accumulated, layered knowledge that takes centuries to build and only minutes to lose. In the 10th century, Bukhara was one of the largest cities in the Islamic world, with a population estimated at 300,000. Its libraries held tens of thousands of manuscripts. Its madrasas trained scholars who would go on to teach in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. And in 980, in a village just outside the city, a child was born who would shape European medicine for the next 600 years. His name was Ibn Sina. In the Latin West, he became known as Avicenna. By the age of 10, he had memorized the Quran. By 18, he he was practicing medicine. By 21, he had written his first major treatise. Over the course of his life, he produced more than 400 works on philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, geology, theology, and medicine. His canon of medicine, completed in 1025, synthesized Greek, Persian, and Arab medical knowledge into a single 14-volume reference work. It was translated into Latin in the 12th century and used as the standard medical textbook in European universities until the 17th century. For 600 years, a doctor trained in Paris, Salerno, or Bologna learned medicine from a book written in Bukhara. He was not alone. Bukhara in this period produced al-Bukhari, who compiled the most authoritative collection of hadith in Sunni Islam. It produced al-Tirmidhi, another foundational hadith scholar. It produced poets, philosophers, astronomers, and geographers whose names are still recited in Central Asia today. To walk into the old city of Bukhara is to feel time slow down. The Ark, a massive earth-walled fortress that served as the seat of the emirs for over 1,000 years, rises above the modern town like a ship beached on a dry sea. Its walls are 18 meters high, made of compressed clay and straw, and they were last rebuilt in the 16th century on foundations laid before the Arab conquest. Inside the Ark stood the throne room, the treasury, the audience halls, and the dungeons. In 1842, two British officers, Colonel Charles Stoddart and Captain Arthur Connolly, were imprisoned in those dungeons. They had been sent to negotiate with the Emir of Bukhara during what the British later called the Great Game, the long contest between London and St. Petersburg for control of Central Asia. The Emir suspected them of being spies. They were held in a vermin-filled pit for months. Then, they were dragged into the square in front of the Ark and beheaded. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves. The square where they died is called the Registan of Bukhara. Today, it is a quiet plaza where pigeons settle in the late afternoon and old men sit in the shade of mulberry trees, drinking tea. There is nothing to mark what happened. The fortress walls absorb everything: sounds, history, blood, time, and give nothing back. South of the Ark, the city opens into a maze of narrow lanes, ancient brick domes, and madrasa courtyards. There are, by one count, more than 400 surviving Islamic monuments inside the old city of Bukhara. 94 mosques, 63 madrasas, all of them within walking distance. The Kalyan minaret, built in 1127, was so beautiful that Genghis Khan, when he sacked the city 100 years later, reportedly stopped his men from destroying it. He looked up at the 47-meter tower of patterned brick and decided that something this remarkable should not be torn down. Almost everything else in Bukhara he burned to the ground. The minaret remained, watching its own city die. Bukhara has survived more invasions than almost any city on earth. Persians, Arabs, Mongols, Uzbeks, Russians, Soviets. It has been sacked, rebuilt, plagued, and rebuilt again. And yet the bones of it, the markets, the brick domes, the trading caravanserai, the merchant houses with their inner courtyards and shaded balconies, are still here. The covered bazaars of Bukhara, where domes were built specifically over crossroads to shade the markets from the desert sun, are the oldest continuously operating commercial buildings of their kind in the world. You can still buy silk in them. You can still buy spices. But the third great city of the Uzbek Silk Road lies further west still, almost on the border with Turkmenistan, at the edge of the Kizilkum Desert. To reach it, you cross 500 kilometers of sand, and when you arrive, you find a city that does not look as if it belongs in the 21st century at all. Khiva is the youngest of the three great cities, in the sense that it became important last. The site is ancient, possibly 2,500 years old, but Khiva's golden age came in the 17th century, when it served as the capital of a khanate that controlled the lower Amu Darya Valley and the desert routes south. By the 19th century, when most of Central Asia was falling under Russian influence, Khiva was still functioning as it had functioned for centuries, as an oasis city ruled by a khan, defended by slaves, fed by irrigation, and isolated by sand. Khiva had one of the largest slave markets in Central Asia. Persian Shiites, captured in cross-border raids by the Desert Turkmen, were sold here by the thousands. Russian travelers in the early 19th century reported seeing chained men waiting in the central square. The slave trade was so central to the Khanate's economy that when Russia finally invaded in 1873, the abolition of slavery was their first formal demand. What is remarkable about Khiva is that the inner city, known as the Ichan Kala, which means within the wall, survived. The walls themselves, 10 meters high and 2 kilometers in circumference, are largely intact, made of the same compressed earth that built Bukhara's Ark. Inside the walls is a perfectly preserved medieval city. There are no cars, there are very few modern buildings. There are mosques with wooden columns carved 1,000 years ago. There are madrasas with cells that still hold the stoves their students used. There is the Kalta Minor, the unfinished short minaret, a stubby cylinder of magnificent turquoise tile, abandoned in 1855 when the Khan who commissioned it died and his son saw no reason to finish it. And at the center of the Ichan Kala stands the Tash Kauli Palace, with its courtyards and harem, and the Friday Mosque, supported by 212 carved wooden pillars, some of them recycled from buildings 1,000 years older. To walk through Khiva at sunset is to step into a city that the rest of the world has somehow forgotten exists. The bricks turn gold in the late light. The minarets catch the last sun. The walls absorb the day's heat and slowly release it through the evening. And the silence is absolute. These three cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, are together one of the densest concentrations of intact medieval Islamic architecture on Earth. UNESCO has listed all three. Travel writers, when they finally see them, run out of adjectives. And for most of the 20th century, almost no one outside the Soviet Union saw them at all. How did the center of the medieval world go silent? To answer that, you have to understand what happened to Uzbekistan in the 400 years after Timur's death. The Timurid Empire fragmented almost immediately. By the early 1500s, Samarkand and Bukhara had been seized by a new wave of conquerors, Uzbek tribes from the steppes north of the Aral Sea, descendants of Genghis Khan's grandson, Shayban. The Uzbeks settled. They intermarried with the older populations. They gave the country its modern name. And under their Khans, the region split into three rival kingdoms: the Khanate of Bukhara, the Khanate of Khiva, and later, the Khanate of Kokand in the Fergana Valley. These Khanates fought each other for 3 centuries. They raided each other's caravans, they captured each other's cities. The Silk Road, which depended on stability and shared protection, began to wither. and by the 17th century, two other developments finished it off. European sailing ships, navigating around Africa and across the Indian Ocean, made the maritime spice trade faster and cheaper than the overland route. And the Ottoman Empire's expansion closed off many of the western terminals of the road. The caravans dwindled, the bazaars contracted, the cities grew quieter. And then, in the second half of the 19th century, came Russia. The Russian Empire had been expanding eastward and southward for 200 years. By 1865, they took Tashkent. In 1867, Bukhara became a protectorate. In 1868, Samarkand fell. In 1873, Khiva surrendered. By 1876, the Khanate of Kokand had been dissolved entirely. All of what is now Uzbekistan came under Russian rule, administered from St. Petersburg through a governor-general in Tashkent. The Khanates kept their thrones, but lost their armies, their foreign policy, and their slave trade. What the Russians wanted from Central Asia was not gold or silk or scholars. It was cotton. The American Civil War, which began in 1861, had cut off the supply of cotton from the American South to European mills, and Russia needed a domestic source. Central Asia, with its endless sun and its irrigable rivers, was perfect. By the end of the 19th century, vast tracts of land in Uzbekistan had been converted from wheat and orchards to cotton monoculture. Then came the Bolshevik Revolution. Then came the Civil War. Then came forced collectivization, in which farms were merged into state-run kolkhozes, and resistance was met with deportation or execution. The Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic was formally created in 1924. Mosques were closed, religious schools were banned. Arabic script was replaced first by a Latin alphabet, then by Cyrillic. The Friday Mosque of Khiva was turned into a museum. The madrasas of Bukhara became warehouses. Tens of thousands of intellectuals, clergy, and traditional leaders were arrested in the purges of the 1930s. Many were shot. And throughout it all, the cotton kept growing. By the 1950s, the Soviet planners in Moscow had set a target. The Uzbek SSR would become the cotton bowl of the entire Eastern Bloc. To meet that target, they would do something that, with the benefit of hindsight, seems almost impossible to comprehend. They would drain a sea. Out in the Kizilkum Desert, away from the cities, the land carries a different kind of memory. The Kizilkum is the 15th largest desert in the world. Roughly 300,000 square kilometers of dunes, gravel pans, salt flats, and the occasional flash of green where an underground spring breaks the surface. It runs from the Aral Sea in the north to the foothills of the Pamirs in the southeast. The name red sand comes from the iron oxide in the soil that turns the dunes a deep rust color at sunset. From the air, the desert looks like the surface of Mars. Life out here adapts in extraordinary ways. The saxaul tree, squat, twisted, with no real leaves to speak of, sends roots 40 meters down to find water. Its wood is so dense, it sinks. Local people have used it for charcoal for thousands of years. Around its roots cluster small mammals, lizards, and the occasional desert tortoise, Testudo horsfieldii, a species that has been crawling these dunes since before humans arrived. Larger animals appear at the desert's edges. The goitered gazelle, a small, pale ungulate that can survive for weeks without standing water, drawing moisture from the plants it eats, moves through the Kizilkum in small herds. They are named for the swelling in the male's throat during the rutting season, a feature that looks faintly absurd until you see one running at 60 kilometers an hour across hard-packed sand. Deeper in the dunes, the desert monitor lizard, the Ranus griseus, patrols the sand. It can grow to 1.5 meters long, and it is, by some margin, the largest reptile in Central Asia. It hunts rodents, snakes, and the occasional bird. When threatened, it inflates itself, hisses, and lashes its tail. It is one of those creatures that looks as if it should not exist, a leftover from a more dangerous epoch, miscalibrated for the modern world. At night, the desert wakes up. Long-eared hedgehogs, small, sand-colored, with absurdly oversized ears that vent heat, emerge from their burrows to hunt beetles. Jerboas, tiny rodents with kangaroo-like hind legs, bounce across the gravel pans. And the solifugids, sun spiders, also called camel spiders, race across the cooler sand in pursuit of insects. They are not true spiders. They have 10 legs, not 8. They are fast, and they are entirely harmless to humans, despite the photographs that occasionally circulate on the internet. Along the rivers that thread through the desert, particularly the lower Amu Darya, there is a different ecosystem entirely. The Tugai forest. Dense, riparian woodland of poplars, willows, and Russian olive, fed by the floodwaters of the river. It is one of the rarest habitat types on Earth. And inside the Tugai, hidden in the undergrowth, lives one of Central Asia's rarest mammals, the Bukhara deer. Cervus elaphus bactrianus, a subspecies of red deer adapted to riverside forests, with a coat that pales to nearly white in winter. By the 1970s, hunting and habitat loss had reduced the global population to perhaps 400 animals. A series of reserves established along the Amu Darya, including the Kizilkum Nature Reserve near Dargan Atta, has slowly brought them back. Their numbers are now in the low thousands. They are still endangered. They are still difficult to see. But they are still here. And occasionally, in the far north of the country, you can see something even older. The Saiga antelope, a creature with a face that looks half mammoth, half camel, an enormous proboscis hanging over its mouth, evolved to filter dust out of the air and warm, cold steppe air before it reaches the lungs. Saigas have been on these plains since the Pleistocene. They have grazed alongside woolly mammoths. They have survived ice ages. And in the past 20 years, they have come close to extinction, hit first by poaching for the horns, and then by a bacterial outbreak in 2015 that killed over 200,000 animals in a single season, more than half the global population. The herds that remain are slowly rebuilding, migrating south from Kazakhstan in winter, occasionally crossing into northern Uzbekistan, survivors of a world that is no longer quite their world. All of this, the desert, the gazelles, the deer, the saiga, the Tugai forest, depends on water. And water, in this part of the world, is the rarest thing of all. 2 rivers feed everything in the lowlands of Uzbekistan. The Amu Darya, the Oxus of the Greeks, the Jaihun of the Arabs, rises in the Pamirs and runs northwest for 2,500 kilometers. The Sir Darya, the Jaxartes of antiquity, rises in the Tian Shan and parallels its sister river to the north. For most of human history, these 2 rivers ended in the same place, a vast inland sea on the border of what is now Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, the Aral Sea. In 1960, it covered 68,000 square kilometers, larger than Sri Lanka, the 4th largest lake on the planet, after the Caspian, Superior, and Victoria. It supported a fishing industry that employed 40,000 people and produced 50,000 tons of fish a year. Sturgeon, carp, pike perch. The fishing town of Muinak on the southern shore was a hub of canneries, boatyards, and Soviet ambition. Today, the Aral is gone. Not metaphorically, literally. Where the sea once was, there is now a desert, the Aral Kum, the new desert, the youngest desert on Earth. It is the size of Belgium. It is composed of the salt and pesticide-laced sediment that lay on the sea floor for millennia. The wind picks it up and carries it for hundreds of kilometers. It poisons fields. It corrodes lungs. It is one of the most thoroughly studied and most heartbreaking ecological disasters in human history. How did this happen? In the 1950s, Soviet planners in Moscow made a decision. They would expand cotton cultivation in Central Asia to a scale never before attempted. They would build a network of irrigation canals, thousands of kilometers of them, to divert water from the Amu Darya and the Sea Darya into the desert, where it would feed cotton fields. Cotton was, in their phrase, white gold. It would clothe the Soviet Union and earn hard currency on world markets. The fact that the rivers fed the Aral Sea was, in the calculus of central planning, a problem to be solved later. The biggest of the canals, the Karakum Canal, was opened in 1959. It ran from the Amu Darya across the desert into Turkmenistan, irrigating cotton fields along its entire length. Within a decade, more than half of the Amu Darya's flow was being diverted before it reached the Aral. The Sea Darya followed soon after. By the late 1960s, both rivers were arriving at the sea as little more than trickles. By the 1980s, in some years, they did not arrive at all. The Aral began to shrink, slowly at first, then faster. The shoreline retreated. Fishing villages found themselves stranded inland. The water that remained grew saltier, concentrated by evaporation, until the native fish could no longer survive. The fisheries collapsed in the early 1980s. The canneries closed. The boats, wooden trawlers, and small steel fishing vessels were left behind on the dried lakebed as the water pulled away. By 2014, the sea had lost more than 90% of its surface area. The eastern lobe of the South Aral had completely dried out. What remained was 4 small remnant lakes, each saltier than the ocean, and a vast plain of salt and chemical dust where the sea floor had been. Munyak, the old fishing port, is now 150 kilometers from any water. The town's harbor, where Soviet fishing boats once unloaded sturgeon, is a dry plain dotted with rusting trawlers. Some still bear their original paint. Some have been climbed by children who carved their names into the hulls. The town's cannery has been turned into a museum. The museum is small. It does not need to be large. Around the dried sea, the people of Karakalpakstan, the autonomous Republic of Uzbekistan that occupies the southwestern corner of the country, bear the costs. Karakalpakstan covers a third of Uzbekistan's land area. Around 1.9 million people live there, most of them ethnically Karakalpak, a Turkic group closely related to the Kazakhs. Their language, their music, their fishing tradition, all of it was shaped by the sea, and all of it has been hollowed out by its loss. The dust storms that lift the Aralkum's salt and pesticide residue blow as far as the Aral coast of Russia and the glaciers of Tajikistan. Infant mortality in Karakalpakstan has been for decades several times the Uzbek average. Anemia is endemic. Tuberculosis, respiratory illness, and certain cancers occur at elevated rates. The water table is contaminated. The soils are too saline to farm without expensive remediation. And the climate has shifted. The moderating effect of the inland sea is gone, so summers are hotter and winters are colder than they used to be. This was the price paid for cotton. The cotton itself was harvested for decades, partly by forced labor. Until 2017, Uzbek schoolchildren, teachers, doctors, and university students were mobilized every autumn to pick cotton in the fields. The system was a direct inheritance from the Soviet kolkhoz. At its peak in the 2010s, around 450,000 adults and an unknown number of children were drafted each year. International boycotts of Uzbek cotton, sustained over a decade, finally forced reform. Forced labor was officially abolished in 2017. The Uzbek government, under a new president, agreed to international monitoring. The harvest is now mostly mechanized and voluntary. But the sea did not come back. A small piece of it did. In 2005, with World Bank assistance, Kazakhstan completed a 13-kilometer dam, the Aral Dam, across the narrow strait that separates the North Aral from the rest of the basin. The dam holds the inflow of the Sea Darya. Within 5 years, the water level on the Kazakh side had risen by 4 meters. The salinity dropped. The fish returned. Aralsk, the old Kazakh fishing port, once stranded 100 kilometers inland, now lies perhaps 15 kilometers from open water. Children there have grown up seeing the sea move back toward them, slowly, year by year. The Uzbek side, the larger southern Aral, has not been so lucky. The Amu Darya simply does not carry enough water anymore after passing through cotton country to refill its half of the basin. What remains of the South Aral is now an industrial site. International companies have been granted contracts to extract oil and gas from the dried-out sea floor. There is no fishing because there is no fish. There is no future for that body of water as a sea. What there is instead is reclamation work. Since 2018, the Uzbek government has been planting saxaul shrubs, that twisted, deep-rooted desert tree, across the dried Aral Kum. 2 million hectares of saxaul at last count. The shrubs hold the dust down. They slow the spread of the salt. They will not bring back the sea, but they will perhaps prevent the desert from getting worse. Out at Muinak, in the early evenings, the trawlers throw long shadows across the dried lake bed. The wind carries salt. The horizon is a line of nothing. Children play on the boats. Their grandfathers grew up fishing here. Their parents grew up with the cannery. They are growing up with a museum. Somewhere east of Muinak, between the rusting boats and the new desert, you can sometimes hear at dawn the call of a hubara bustard, a large, ground-dwelling bird that has hung on through the changes, that nests in the new wastes, that lives in the world the cotton plan left behind. And further east still, in the corner of the country that the Soviet planners never quite managed to redesign, the old Uzbekistan is more visible. The Fergana Valley is shaped like an almond, 200 kilometers long, 70 kilometers wide, ringed by mountains, watered by the Sea Darya and 100 glacial streams. It is the most densely populated valley in Central Asia. Around 14 million people live here, divided across 3 countries: Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, by borders drawn during the Soviet era that in places slice through villages and run between houses on the same street. The valley has been settled for at least 4,000 years. The earliest known cities in the region, Andijan, Margilan, Kokand, predate the Common Era. Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire of India, was born in 1483 in Andijan, in what was then the eastern edge of the Timurid world. He spent his early years fighting for control of Samarkand, lost, fled south through the mountains, and eventually established a new empire in Delhi. His autobiography, the Baburnama, is one of the great works of medieval Asian literature, and large parts of it describe the Fergana Valley with the homesickness of a man who never stopped missing it. Margilan, in the center of the valley, has been a silk-weaving city for at least 1,000 years. The looms are still here, so is the technique. Atlas and Adras, two kinds of ikat-dyed silk in which the threads are dyed in patterns before they are woven, so that the finished fabric appears almost out of focus, like a painting blurred by rain. The colors, saffron, indigo, pomegranate, lapis, are still mostly natural. The workshops are still mostly family-run, and the cloth is still mostly sold from the looms to the bazaars in the next street. In the bazaars of the Fergana Valley, you can smell the bread before you see it. The Uzbek tandoor, a clay oven fired with wood or coal with a tapered opening at the top, produces a flatbread called non. It is, by common Central Asian consensus, the best of its kind. Every region has its own variation. Margilan's is stamped with a flower pattern and sprinkled with sesame and kalonji. Samarkand's is denser, heavier, the size of a dinner plate, golden and chewy. Bukhara's is marked with a square stamp and dotted with nigella seeds. Tashkent's is decorated with elaborate metal-stamped patterns. There is a saying in Uzbekistan that you should never set bread on the table upside down, never cut it with a knife, and never throw away a crumb. Bread is sacred. Bread, like the Silk Road that originally brought wheat varieties along it, is the foundation of everything else. And then there is plov, or depending on the region, palov or osh or pilaf. Long-grain rice, slow-cooked in a heavy iron cauldron called a kazan, layered with mutton or beef, sliced carrots, onions, garlic, chickpeas, raisins, and quince when in season, and stewed in sheep-tail fat until each grain of rice is glossed with the broth. UNESCO has listed Uzbek plov on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. It is the national dish. It is also traditionally men's work. The oshpaz, the plov master, is a recognized craft in Uzbek society. At weddings, oshpazes have been recorded cooking a single kazan of plov large enough to feed 1,000 guests. In 2017, in Tashkent, a team of cooks broke the Guinness World Record by preparing a single plov weighing 7.5 tons. All of this happens around a low table called a dastarkhan, in a courtyard or a tea house or someone's home, with green tea served in shallow ceramic bowls, and bread torn by hand, and conversation that lasts all afternoon. Uzbek hospitality is a kind of national project. There is a custom that if you fill a guest's teacup more than half full, you are signaling that they have stayed too long and should leave. So tea is poured in small amounts, frequently throughout the meal. Each refill is a renewal of welcome. This is what the Soviet experiment did not erase. The bread, the plov, the silk, the tea, the architecture of the Dastarkhan, which is older than any state that has ever tried to rule this place. To the north, beyond the Fergana Mountains, lies Tashkent, the capital and the largest city in Central Asia. 2.5 million people, a skyline of concrete apartment blocks, Soviet ministries, glass-fronted banks, and the occasional surviving madrasa from the era before the railway arrived. Tashkent's metro stations are the unexpected glory of the city. Built between 1972 and 2001, they were designed in the high Soviet style: marble columns, chandeliers, mosaic murals, intricate metalwork, and for decades, photographing them was illegal because they doubled as nuclear shelters. The Kosmonavtla station commemorates Soviet space exploration, with portraits of Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova set into the walls. The Alisher Navoy station honors the 15th century poet who shaped the literary Uzbek language. The Paktakor station is decorated with cotton flowers. The murals are an entire visual archive of what the Soviet Uzbek state thought of itself. On the morning of April 26, 1966, at 5:23, a magnitude 5.5 earthquake struck directly under the city. The shaking lasted 12 seconds. By the time it stopped, 2/3 of central Tashkent, including most of its remaining 19th century neighborhoods, had collapsed. 300,000 people were left homeless. 8 died. The rest of the Soviet Union sent crews from 12 republics to rebuild the city, in a project that took 6 years and produced the wide boulevards and concrete apartment blocks of modern Tashkent. It was, in a strange way, an act of socialist solidarity, and it remains a point of pride. But it also erased the city's old urban grain. What you see in Tashkent today is mostly post-earthquake. The old city, the labyrinthine network of mahallas and tandoor-fired courtyards, survives in fragments on the edges. One fragment, however, is unique. In the Hazrati Imam complex, in the old city, sits a glass case. Inside the case is a manuscript, heavy parchment pages, dark, blocky Kufic script, the Uthman Quran, compiled in Medina in the year 651, 19 years after the death of the Prophet, under the orders of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan. It is one of the 4 oldest surviving Quran manuscripts in the world. It was brought to Samarkand by Timur after his campaigns in the Caucasus. It was looted by the Russians in 1868 and taken to St. Petersburg. It was returned by Lenin in 1924 as a gesture to the new Uzbek SSR. It has been in Tashkent ever since. Around 2/3 of the manuscript has been lost over the centuries. What remains is roughly 350 pages. You can stand a meter away from them. The pages were copied by hand around the time the first stones of the Dome of the Rock were being laid in Jerusalem. They are older than every cathedral in Europe. They have outlived empires. Outside Tashkent, in the country's other cities, the post-Soviet decades have unfolded slowly. After independence in 1991, Uzbekistan was governed for 25 years by Islam Karimov, the former first secretary of the Uzbek Communist Party, who reinvented himself as the country's first president. Karimov kept Uzbekistan tightly closed. Foreign journalists were rarely admitted, visas were difficult, opposition was crushed. In 2005, in the city of Andijan, government troops opened fire on a demonstration. Estimates of the dead range from several hundred to over 1,000. International condemnation followed. Karimov closed the country further. The cotton harvest continued. The Aral continued to die. Karimov ruled until his death in 2016. For most of those years, the bright cities his country contained, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, received only a trickle of foreign visitors. Most Western travelers, if they had heard of Uzbekistan at all, had heard of it in the abstract. Border guards were hostile, currency exchange was complicated, hotels were monitored. A single complaint from a tourist could result in expulsion. To enter the country was to enter a place where the world had agreed, by mutual oversight, to look away. And then, in September 2016, Karimov died. What happened next would not have been predicted by anyone watching the country in 2015. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who had served as Karimov's prime minister for 13 years and was widely expected to continue his policies, became president. And within a year, he began to do something unexpected. He opened the borders. In 2018, Uzbekistan introduced electronic visas for citizens of 51 countries. In 2019, it dropped visa requirements entirely for citizens of dozens more. By 2024, nationals of nearly 100 countries, including most of the European Union, the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Israel, and much of the Gulf, could enter Uzbekistan without a visa for stays of up to 30 days. In January 2026, Americans were added to the list. In 2016, the year Karimov died, Uzbekistan received roughly 1 million foreign visitors. In 2024, that number was 8.2 million. By November 2025, the country had welcomed over 10.5 million tourists in 11 months, a level of openness that, 10 years earlier, would have been unimaginable. In Samarkand, the Registan now lights up at night with a sound and image projection that travel writers have begun to call gaudy. New hotels have gone up along the avenue leading to the old city. A high-speed train, the Afrasiyob, now connects Tashkent to Samarkand in 2 hours and to Bukhara in just under 4. The journey that once took a caravan 3 weeks now takes the morning. In Bukhara, the bazaars under the old domes have filled again with goods, silks, carpets, lacquered boxes, embroidered hats, and the tea houses are full at lunchtime. In Khiva, the Ichan Kala has been carefully restored, and the city was named the tourism capital of the Islamic world by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in 2024. Restaurants have opened inside madrasa courtyards. Guides in the old Khan's palace explain the difference between the harem and the audience chamber to busloads of visitors who, 2 decades ago, would not have been allowed past the airport. All across Uzbekistan, the practical evidence of opening is everywhere. The high-speed trains, the new airports, the English language signs, the young Uzbeks who speak excellent English, Russian, Korean, and Mandarin, working as guides in Samarkand and waiters in Bukhara. The country is rediscovering that its great inheritance is not cotton, and not gold, and not gas. It is the cities. And yet, the sea did not come back. The Aral remains a wound. Karakalpakstan remains the poorest region of the country. The forced cotton harvests have ended, but the consequences of those harvests are still measured in lifespans and in birth weights and in cancer registries. The political system, while less repressive than under Karimov, remains tightly controlled. The president, who is now in his second 7-year term, after a series of widely criticized elections, holds nearly all real power. Uzbekistan today is a country in the middle of remembering what it was. The Silk Road bones are still here. The Soviet bones are still here. The medieval scholars are still being taught in schools, and the medieval damage to Karakalpakstan is still being treated in clinics. Both things are true. And in the early mornings before the heat builds up, the Registan in Samarkand is mostly empty. The light catches the turquoise tile at a low angle. The Ulugh Beg Madrasa, the Sher Door, the Tilya Kori, three facades that have not all been simultaneously visible to the outside world for very long, stand in the square that Timur designed and his grandsons completed. The patterns on the tiles are still mathematics, the calligraphy on the Iwans is still poetry, and the bricks at the corners, where the dome meets the drum, are still the same bricks the masons set there in the 1500s. Out in the desert, the saxol shrubs are taking root in soil that used to be the bottom of a sea. The Bukhara deer are calving in the Tugay forest along the Amu Darya. The saiga are migrating back across the border from Kazakhstan. The fishing on the Kazakh side of the Aral is small but real. And in the old fishing port of Muinak, the rusting boats wait. They do not move. They will not move again. They are no longer waiting for the sea to return. They are waiting, perhaps, for someone to understand what they were built to do, and what was done to them, and why. A century ago, the center of the medieval world disappeared behind borders that did not exist when its cities were built. A generation ago, the fourth largest lake on the planet disappeared into a desert that was not there before. A decade ago, those same cities were almost impossible to visit. Today, the country is open. The borders are porous, the trains are fast, the bread is still made the way Avicenna's neighbors made it. The plov is still cooked by men in iron cauldrons over wood fires. Uzbekistan is one of the only two double-landlocked countries on Earth. It is also one of the only places where you can still see what the Silk Road looked like at the height of its glory. Both of these things became true in the same century. The world is only now starting to notice. Thank you for traveling with us. If you'd like to keep walking these old roads, through the deserts, the cities, and the histories that built them, subscribe and join us for the next journey. Until then, take a breath, stay a while.